Hello, and welcome to our 24th Tuesday Tales of Terror. Yes, welcome. This is part 6 of Clive Barker's The Thief of Always. And we are about to start chapter 16. And where we left off was that Wendell and Harvey have decided that they're going to go back to the house in order to put an end to it or something. They have some kind of master plan that we will figure out as we go. Back to the Happy Land. It was as if the house knew that they were coming back and was calling to them. As soon as they stepped out into the street, their feet seemed to know the way. All they had to do was let them lead. "What do we do when we get there?" Wendell wanted to know. "I mean, we only just escaped with our lives last time." "Mrs. Griffin will help us," Harvey said. Wendell's breath quickened. "Suppose Karna bit her head off," he said. "Then we'll have to do it alone." "Do what?" "Find Hood." "But you told me he was dead." "I don't think being dead means much to a creature like him," Harvey said. "He's in the house somewhere, Wendell, and we have to hunt him down whether we like it or not. He's the one who stole all those years with our moms and dads, and we won't get them back until we face him." "You make it sound easy," Wendell said. "The whole house is a box of tricks," Harvey reminded him. "The seasons, the presents, they're all illusions. We have to hold on to that." "Harvey, look." Wendell pointed ahead of them. Harvey knew the street at a glance. 33 days ago he'd stood here with Rictus and listened to the tell him what a fine place lay on the other side of the mist wall up ahead. "This is it, then," Harvey said. It was strange, but he didn't feel afraid, even though he knew they were walking back into their enemy's arms. It was better to face Hood and his illusions now than to spend the rest of his life wondering about Lulu and mourning the years he'd lost. "Are you ready?" he asked Wendell. "Before we go," his friend replied, "can we get just one thing straight? If the house is all illusions, then how come we felt the cold? And how come I got fat from eating Miss Griffin's pies? And I don't know," Harvey cut in, doubt running a cold finger up his spine. "I can't explain how Hood's magic works. All I know is he took all those years away to feed himself." "Feed?" "Yeah, like, like a vampire." This was the first time Harvey had thought of Hood that way, but it instinctively seemed right. Blood was life, and life was what Hood fed upon. He was a vampire, sure enough, maybe a king among vampires. "So shouldn't we have a stake or holy water or something?" "That's just in stories," Harvey said. "But if he comes after us?" "We fight." "Fight with what?" Harvey shrugged. The truth was, he didn't know, but he was sure that crosses and prayers weren't going to be any use in the battle that lay ahead. "No more talk," he said to Wendell. "If you don't want to come, then don't." "I didn't say that." "Good," said Harvey, and started toward the mist. Wendell followed on his heels, and just as Harvey stepped into the wall, he snatched hold of his friend's sleeve, so that they entered as they had exited, together. The mist closed around them like a water-logged blanket, pressing so hard against their faces, Harvey half thought it intended to smother them. But it only wished to keep them from changing their minds. A moment later, a tremor moved through its folds and spat them out on the other side. It was high summer in Hood's kingdom. The lazy season. The sun, which had been hidden by rain clouds on the house, and all that had prospered around it. Oh, what? Whoa, we missed a line. Hold on there. We've got to move on back. Let's start this paragraph over. It was high summer in Hood's kingdom, the lazy season. The sun, which had been hidden by rain clouds on the other side of the mist, was beaming down on the house and all that prospered around it. The trees swayed in a balmy breeze. The doors and windows of the house, its porch and chimneys all gleamed as if newly painted. There were welcoming songs in the eaves, welcoming smells from the kitchen, welcoming laughter through the open door. Welcome, everywhere, welcome. "I'd forgotten," Wendell murmured. "Forgotten what?" "How beautiful it is." "Don't trust it," Harvey said. "It's all illusion, remember? All of it." Wendell didn't reply, but wandered away toward the trees. The honey breeze gusted around him, as if to pluck him up. He didn't resist, but went where it led into the dappled shade. Can you stop? "Wendell," Harvey said, following him across the lawn. "We've got to stick together." "I'd forgotten about the treehouse," Wendell said dreamily, staring up into the canopy. "We had such fun up there, remember?" "No," said Harvey, determined not to let the past distract him from his mission here. "I don't remember." "Yes, you do," said Wendell, smiling from ear to ear. "We worked so hard up there. I'm going up to see how it looks." Harvey grabbed his arm. "No, you're not." "Yes, I am," he snapped back, wrenching his arm from Harvey's grip. "I can do whatever I want. You don't own me." Harvey could see by the glazed look in Wendell's eyes that the house was already working its seductive magic. It could only be a matter of time, he knew, before his own powers of resistance were worn away. And what then? Would he forget his work here entirely and become an empty-headed boy, laughing like a loon while his soul was sucked away? "No," he said aloud. "I'm not going to let you do it." "Do what?" said Wendell. "We've got work to do," Harvey told him. "Oh, who cares?" Wendell replied. "I do, and so did you 5 minutes ago. Remember what it did to us, Wendell." The wind in the trees seemed to sigh at this. "Ah," it said, as if it now understood Harvey's purpose here, and would waft this intelligence to the ears of Mr. Hood. Harvey didn't care. In fact, he was pleased. "Go on," he said as the gusts flew toward the house. "Tell him! Tell him!" He turned on Wendell. "Are you coming? Or am I going to go in alone?" "I don't mind going in," Wendell said cheerily. "I'm hungry." Harvey stared hard at Wendell. "Don't you remember anything we said out there?" he demanded. "Of course I do," Wendell replied. "We said we were going to—" He paused, frowning. Going to place a stolen time that belonged to us, Wendell." "How did it do that?" said Wendell, still frowning deeply. "It's just... Again he faltered, searching for the words. "Just such a perfect day." The frown began to fade again, and a broad smile replaced it. "Who cares?" Wendell said. "I mean, on a day like this, who cares? Let's just enjoy ourselves." Harvey shook his head. He was losing precious time here, which was exactly what Hood and the house wanted. Instead of wasting any further words on Wendell, he turned on his heel and headed toward the front door. "Wait for me!" Wendell hollered. "Can you smell that pie?" Harvey could, and wished he'd put some food in his belly before he'd started out on this adventure. Knowing that these tantalizing smells were all part of Hood's repertoire wasn't enough to stop his mouth from watering or his stomach from grumbling. All he could do was think of the dust to which his ark animals had turned when he'd stepped out into the street. The pie on the kitchen table was probably made of the same bitter stuff, concealed beneath a veneer of sweetness. He held on to that thought as best he could, knowing that the house into which he was about to step would be full of such blandishments. With Wendell again trailing a step behind, he climbed the porch steps and marched into the house. The moment they were both inside, the door slammed behind them. Harvey reeled around, his skin crawling. It was not the wind that had thrown the door shut. It was Rictus. Chapter 17. Cook, Cat, and Coffin. And here we have a photo of perhaps a cat buried in a coffin. "Great to have you back, boy," Rictus said, his smile as wide as ever. "I told everyone you wouldn't be able to stay away. Nobody believed me. He's gone, they said. He's gone. But I knew better." He started to wander around Harvey. "I knew he wouldn't be satisfied with a little visit, not with so much fun still to be had." "I'm hungry," Wendell whined. "Help yourselves," Rictus grinned. Wendell was off at a sprint into the kitchen. "Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy," he hollered. "Look at all this food." Harvey didn't reply. "Aren't you hungry?" Rictus said, raising an eyebrow high above his spectacles. He cupped his hand behind his ear. "That sounds like an empty belly to me." "Where's Mrs. Griffin?" Harvey said. "Oh, she's around," Rictus said mischievously. "But she's getting old. She takes to her bed a good deal these days, so we laid her down somewhere safe and sound." As he spoke, there was a mewling sound from the living room, and there at the door stood Stew Cat. Rictus scowled. "Get out of here, pussy," he spat. "Can't you see we're having a conversation?" But Stew Cat wasn't about to be intimidated. He sauntered over to Harvey, rubbing herself against his legs. "What do you want?" Harvey said, going down on his haunches to stroke her. She purred loudly. "Hey, that's fine and dandy," Rictus said, putting off his anger in favor of a freshly polished smile. "You like the cat likes you. Everybody's happy." "I'm not happy," Harvey said. "And why's that?" "I left all my presents here, and I don't know where." "No problem," said Rictus. "I'll find them for you." "Would you do that?" Harvey said. "Sure, kid," said Rictus, persuaded that his charm was working again. "That's what we're all here for, to give you whatever your heart desires." "I think maybe I left them up in my bedroom," Harvey suggested. I think I saw them up there," Rictus replied. "You stay right here. I'll be back." He took himself up the stairs, 2 and 3 at a time, whistling tunelessly through his teeth as he ascended. Harvey waited until he disappeared from sight, and then went to check on Wendell, letting Stew Cat slip away. "Ah, now, look at this," a voice said as he appeared at the kitchen door. It was Jive. He was standing at the stove, as sinewy as ever, juggling eggs with one hand and tossing pancakes in a pan with the other. "What do you fancy?" he said. "Sweet or savory?" "Nothing," Harvey said. "It's all good." "Oh, it's all good," Wendell piped up. He was almost hidden behind a wall of filled plates. "Try the apple turnovers. They're great." Harvey was sorely tempted. The buffet looked wonderfully tempting, but it was dust. He had to keep remembering that. "Maybe later," he said, averting his eyes to the heaps of syrup-drenched waffles and bowls of ice cream. "Where you going?" Jive wanted to know. "Mr. Rictus is finding a few presents for me," Harvey said. Jive smiled with satisfaction. "So, you're getting back to the swing of things, kiddo," he said. "Good for you." "I've missed being here," Harvey replied. He didn't linger, just in case Jive saw the lie in his eyes, but turned and headed back into the hallway. Stew Cat was still there, staring at him. "What is it?" he said. The cat took off toward the stairs, and then stopped and cast a backward glance. "Have you something to show me?" Harvey whispered. At this, the cat bounded off again. Harvey followed, expecting her to lead the way upstairs, but before she reached the bottom step, she veered off to her left, and led Harvey down a narrow passage to a door he had never even noticed before. He rattled the handle, but the door was locked. Turning to look for Stew Cat, he found her rubbing her arched back against the leg of a small table set nearby. On the table was a carved wooden box. In the box was a key. He went back to the door, unlocked it, and pulled it open. There was a flight of wooden steps in front of him, leading down into a darkness from which a sour, dank smell rose. He might have declined to descend had Stew Cat not hurried on past him down into the murk. With his fingers trailing on the damp walls to the left and right of him, he followed Stew Cat to the bottom of the flight, counting the steps as he went. There were 52, and by the time he had descended them all, his eyes had become reasonably accustomed to the gloom. The cellar was cavernous, but empty, except for a litter of rubble and a large wooden box, which lay in the dust maybe a dozen yards from where he stood. "What is it?" he hissed to Stu-Cat, knowing the creature had no way of replying, but hoping for some sign nevertheless. Stu-Cat's only answer was to run across the floor and leap nimbly up onto the box, where it began to claw at the wood. Harvey's curiosity was stronger than his fear, but not so much stronger that he dashed to pull off the lid. He approached as though the box were some sleeping beast, which for all he knew it was. The closer he got, the more it resembled a crude coffin. But what kind of coffin was sealed with a padlock? Was this where Karna had been laid, perhaps, after the beast had dragged its wounded body back home? Was it now, even listening to Stu-Cat scratch on the lid, waiting for release? As he came within a yard of the casket, however, he laid eyes on a clue to its contents. An apron string, left hanging out the box by whoever had locked it. He knew of only one person in the house who wore an apron. "Mrs. Griffin!" he whispered, digging his fingernails under the lid. "Mrs. Griffin! Are you in there?" There was a muffled thump from inside. "I'm going to get you out," he promised, hauling on the lid as hard as he could. He didn't have the strength to break the lock. In desperation, he began to search the cellar, looking for some tool or other, and found himself 2 sizable rocks. Hefting them, he returned to the casket. "This is going to be noisy," he warned Mrs. Griffin. Then, using one stone as a kind of chisel and the other as a hammer, he assaulted the lock. Blue sparks flew as he struck at the metal, but he seemed to be making no impression until, all of a sudden, the lock gave a loud crack and fell to the ground. He paused for a moment, a feather of doubt brushing his eyebrow. Suppose it was Karna's coffin. Then he threw the rocks aside and hauled off the lid. And here is an illustration of the lock breaking and falling to the ground. Chapter 18, The Bitter Truth. And here we have this wailing person. He almost shouted out loud, seeing the terrible state that poor Mrs. Griffin was in. She was staring up at him with wild eyes, her hair pulled out in clawfuls, her face purple with bruises. A foul rag had been stuffed into her mouth. Harvey carefully removed it, and she began to speak, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Oh, thank you, my sweet. Thank you," she said. "But, oh, you shouldn't have come back. It's too dangerous here." "Who did this to you?" "Jive and Rictus." "But he ordered it, didn't he?" Harvey said, helping her up. "Don't tell me he's dead, because I know that doesn't matter. Hood's here in the house, isn't he?" "Yes," she said, holding on to him as she climbed up out of the box. "Yes, he's here, but not in the way you think." She began to weep, the tears clogging her words. "It's all right," Harvey said. "Everything's going to be all right." Her fingers went up to her face and touched the tears. I thought I'd never cry again," she said. "Look what you've done." "I'm sorry," said Harvey. "Oh, no, sweet. Don't be sorry. It's wonderful." She smiled through her tears. "You've broken his curse on me." "What curse?" "Oh, it's a long story." "I want to hear." "I was the first child who ever came to Hood's house," she said. "This was many, many years ago. I was 9 when I first walked up the front path. I'd run away from home, you see." "Why?" "My cat had died, and my father refused to buy me another. And what do you think Rictus gave me the very day I arrived?" "3 cats," said Harvey. "You know how this works, don't you?" Harvey nodded. "It gives you whatever you think you want. And I wanted cats, and a home, and..." "What?" "And another father." She shivered with fear, remembering the horror. I met Hood that night. At least I heard his voice. Stu Cat had come to her feet, and she paused to stoop and gather the creature into her arms. Where did you hear him? Harvey asked. In the attic, at the top of the house. And he said to me, if you stay here forever and ever, you'll never die. You'll grow old, but you'll live until the end of time and never weep again. And that's what you wanted? It was stupid, but yes, I did. I was afraid, you see. Afraid of being put into the ground like my cat. A new wave of tears came running down her pale cheeks. I was running away from death. Straight into its house, Harvey said. Oh, no, child, Mrs. Griffin said. Hood isn't death. She wiped away her tears so as to see Harvey more clearly. Death now. Like a friend I'd driven away from my door. I've seen too much, my sweet. Too many seasons. Too many children. Why didn't you try and stop him? I have no power against him. All I could do was give the children who came here as much happiness as I knew how. How old are you? Harvey asked her. Who knows? She replied, laying her cheek against Stu Cat's fur. I grew up and old in a matter of days, but then the passage of time seemed to lose its hold on me. Sometimes I've wanted to ask one of the children, what year is it in the world outside? I can tell you. Don't, she said, putting her finger to her lips. I don't want to know how the years have flown. It would hurt too much. What do you want, then? To die, she said, with a little smile. To slip out of the skin and go to the stars. Is that what happens? It's what I believe, she said. But Hood won't let me die. Not ever. That'll be his revenge on me for helping you to escape. He already had Blue Cat murdered for showing you the way out. Hood's going to let you go, Harvey said. I promise. I'm going to make him. She shook her head. You're so brave, my sweet, she said. But he won't let any of us go. There's such a terrible emptiness inside him. He wants to fill it with souls, but it's a pit. A bottomless pit. And you're both heading for it, said an oily voice. The speaker was Mar. She was oozing down the stairs. We've been looking for you up and down, she said to Harvey. You'd better come with me, child. She extended her arms in Harvey's direction. He remembered all too well her transforming touch. Come, she said. I might still get you out of trouble if you let me make something humble of you. He likes humble things, does Mr. Hood. Fleas, worms, scabby dogs. Come to me, child, quickly. Harvey looked around the cellar. There were no other ways out. If he was to get Mrs. Griffin up into the sun, it had to be by way of stairs, and Mar was standing in front of them. He took a step in her direction. She smiled toothlessly. Good child. Good, she said. Don't, Mrs. Griffin said. She'll hurt you. Hush, woman, Mar said. We're going to have to nail that lid shut next time. Her greasy green eyes swiveled back in Harvey's direction. He knows what's good for him, don't you, boy? Harvey didn't reply. He simply kept walking toward Mar, whose fingers seemed to be growing like a snail's horns, reaching out to fix upon his face. You've been such an obedient boy, Mar went on. Maybe I won't turn you into a worm after all. What would you like to be? Tell Tell me what's in your heart." "Never mind my heart," Harvey said, reaching out toward Mar. "What about yours?" A puzzled look came over Mar's face. "Mine?" she said. "Yes," said Harvey. "What do you dream of becoming?" "I never dream," she said defiantly. "You should try it," Harvey told her. "If you can change me into a worm or a bat, what could you do for yourself?" The defiance on her face became bafflement, and the bafflement turned to panic. Her outstretched fingers began to retreat into themselves. Harvey reached for them like lightning, however, interweaving his fingers with hers. "What do you want to be?" he said to her. "Think!" She started to struggle, and he felt her magic surging through her fingers into his, attempting to work some change on him. But he didn't want to be a vampire bat anymore, and he certainly didn't want to be a worm. He was quite happy to be himself. The magic, therefore, had no hold on him. Instead, it flowed back into Mar, who began to shake as though she were being dipped in icy water. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Tell me what's in your heart," he said, returning her invitation. "I'm not telling you," she replied, still trying to wrest her fingers free of his. But she was not used to having her victims resist her this way. Her muscles were soft and flabby. She pulled and pulled, but she couldn't escape him. "Leave me alone," she said. "If you harm me, Mr. Hood will have your head." "I'm not harming you," Harvey replied. "I'm just letting you have your dreams, the way you let me have mine." "I don't want them," she yelled, struggling more than ever. He wouldn't let her go. Instead, he drew closer to her as if to wrap her up in his arms. She started to spit at him, great gobs of slime, but he wiped them from his face and kept approaching her. "No," she began to murmur. "No." But she couldn't keep the magic she'd intended for him from working on her own skin and bones. Her fat face began to soften and run like melting wax. Her body sagged in its ragged coat, and a greenish gruel began to pour out onto the floor. "Oh," she sobbed, "you damnable child." What dream was this, Harvey wondered, that was turning Mar to mush? She was growing smaller all the time, her clothes dropping off her as her body shrank, her voice becoming thin. It could only be moments before she disappeared altogether. "What do you dream about?" Harvey said, as Mar's fingers ran away between his own like brackish water. "I dream of nothing," Mar replied, her eyes sinking back into her disintegrating skull. "And that's what I've become." She was almost lost in the folds of her clothes. "Nothing," she said again. She was no more than a dirty puddle now, a puddle with a fading voice. "Nothing." Then she was gone, devoured by her own magic. "You did it," Mrs. Griffin said. "Child, you did it." "One down, 3 to go," Harvey said. 3? "Rictus, Jive, and Hood himself." "You're forgetting Connor." "Is it still alive?" Mrs. Griffin nodded. "I'm afraid I've heard its shrieks every night. It wants revenge." "And I want my life back," Harvey said, taking her by the arm and escorting her, still carrying Stu Cat, to the bottom of the stairs. "I'm going to get it, Mrs. Griffin. Whatever it takes, I'm going to get it." Mrs. Griffin glanced back at the heap of clothes that marked the place where Mar had vanished into thin air. "Maybe you can," she said with astonishment in her voice. "Of all the children who've come here, maybe you're the one who can beat Hood at his own game." And that is the end of chapter 18. Wonderful. So, of course, please join me next week for part 7 of Clive Barker's The Thief of Always. Thank you for being here, either in the live recording or later on. I am happy that you're here. And I hope that you have an excellent new year, and that it starts off your 2023 exactly the way that it's meant to be. And as always, stay spooky. Get out of here, you hoodlums.